The doors were always locked, not for maintenance, not for renovations, but because what lay behind them was something even the most devout parishioners were never meant to see. Imagine walking into a place meant for peace, prayer, and sacred rituals, only to realize that beneath the polished floors and stained glass windows, a darkness had been quietly waiting for decades. Tonight on Mr. Whisper's Official, we are peeling back the sanctified veneer of churches, revealing the secrets hidden in their basements, rooms sealed for a reason, echoes of horror that church leaders and local communities desperately tried to forget. These aren't urban legends whispered on a dare. These are true accounts from real people who entered sacred ground and discovered something that no sermon, prayer, or holy water could have prepared them for. As we descend into these long-forgotten spaces, ask yourself, what would you do if the sacred suddenly became terrifying, and the walls you trusted to protect you were the very ones hiding unimaginable horrors? Make sure you subscribe to Mr. Whisper's Official, because tonight, we're about to explore the darkness lurking beneath the most unlikely of places, the very floors of churches themselves. Lucas had always been drawn to old churches, the way their towering spires and weathered stone carried centuries of history, stories, and whispered prayers. But nothing in his experience as a local historian or amateur photographer had prepared him for the basement of St. Agnes. Church in rural Kentucky, a place that had remained sealed for over 30 years, ever since the congregation reported strange noises and a faint, persistent iron scent that seemed to seep from beneath the floorboards during renovations in the late 1980s. And when Lucas was asked to help catalog artifacts and photograph forgotten spaces for the town's historical society, he approached the assignment with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, aware that the church's long-abandoned crypt had been a source of local lore and hushed warnings. And yet curiosity propelled him forward as he carefully navigated the narrow stairwell descending behind the altar, feeling the air grow colder and heavier with each step, a damp mustiness that clung to his jacket and hair, carrying with it a faint tang of rust like old blood that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. And as he reached the bottom of the stairs, Lucas found himself in a low-ceilinged room with stone walls that were slick with decades of moisture, where the only light came from the narrow beam of his flashlight cutting across the dark. And what first caught his eye were the outlines of small, rectangular depressions in the floor, arranged with deliberate precision and deep enough to suggest that something had rested there for prolonged periods. And as Lucas moved closer, his foot brushed against a loose piece of floorboard, revealing a dark stain underneath that pulsed faintly in the beam of his light, the iron scent growing stronger, and he realized with a cold shock that these resins of Sogol, and the air in the wood itself, and the air in the basements of Sebbles. Stelvins in the woods, and the wood itself in the woods. Selvins in the air in Selshal. Selvins in selves, to settle, couldn't sing, singing, some song and some soul, one song, some soul and one song. I'm winning well, I'm proud, but we're on the with one time. I want the friends to it with the house. We are remember what was I lost so sis was all what that was the fool and was hope just a soul carrying the faintest echo of voices that weren't there, whispers too soft to understand, yet unmistakably human. And Lucas, despite his rational mind, could not deny the sense of being watched from the shadowed corners where the light failed to penetrate, the room seemingly alive with memories of events long buried. And as he stepped further into the center of the space, he noticed a narrow doorway in the far wall, previously hidden by a heavy curtain of cobwebs and dust, which led into a smaller, even darker chamber that contained a collection of what appeared to be child-sized pews or benches, lined neatly against the walls, and the floor beneath them was marred with more of those dark stains, concentrated in patterns that suggested movement, dragging, or perhaps ritualistic placement. And Lucas, compelled by a mix of dread and scholarly obsession, knelt to examine the nearest stain, brushing away decades of dust and grime to reveal the unmistakable imprint of fingers, tiny and delicate, pressed deeply into the wood. And as he held his flashlight steady, he realized that each bench bore similar marks, arranged as if multiple small hands had reached upward in unison, frozen in the final moments of some unspeakable event. And the whispers he had been hearing grew louder, more insistent, though still unintelligible, and Lucas felt a sudden chill that swept through the room, as if the base felt a sudden chill that felt the summon it froned. Yet though something it stelled, it as though something didn't lith, yet if he hadn't let, get his lead of helps beneath, played at the boyer bed, plate, but with folk up, but it as though to be, bubs but been with him in bed, bow bed, rump with in bimum, but it by hip, repressed it set. Papa, man, with it a bit of a thought up, it prepared to come with it a bit to put some my whip out like I'm up, and I tried to cut down with the necessity. I feel more than you, I will out through it again. Hope, I A subtle vibration traveling through the stone and wood, almost like a heartbeat, and Luca's flashlight flickered in response, casting long, twitching shadows along the walls that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. And with a sinking feeling, he realized that the basement was not empty, that the echoes of what had been whatever dark presence had been sealed, away remained, lingering in the air, the wood, the stone. And as he took a cautious step back toward the stairwell, a sudden, sharp noise erupted from the small chamber. A scraping and thumping that made his heart leap, and Lucas froze, gripping his flashlight tighter, shining it toward the source, and there, just at the edge of visibility, he thought he saw movement. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there, a shifting of shadows and stains that suggested something still inhabited the space, something that had learned to remain unseen yet was aware of his intrusion. And in that instant, Lucas understood why the church had locked that door decades ago, why locals whispered of the basement in hushed tones, why no one dared disturb it. For what lay beneath St. Agnes Church was a residue of terror, a living memory of past horrors etched into the very foundations, and the realization left him breathless, knowing that he had not simply discovered a forgotten but had not entered to realisate it, when it hopens luffer to severance, but it had eper out coexit, and it help it out, and it elko with the elker's calyx, salam. Wenerg, sal, and salom, sen, one, wine, upod,
Papa and Don, I'm one, and some ways where to discern us, one like us, fell where I wasn't the self power and such why word, I word that I hold a supermoon. I said, ahead of them, oh, well, I'm a city, I want to shit, that's the term, I'm sent the word of the after man, this is a good one, and or is this, I don't want to laugh when
waiting for the next unwitting soul to step into their midst, and with a shudder, Lucas retreated up the stairs, sealing the basement once again, carrying with him the knowledge that some doors are locked for a reason, and some secrets are never meant to see the light of day. Yet the stains, the whispers, and the lingering sense of eyes in the darkness would haunt him forever. Oliver had always been fascinated by the history of old churches, their silent corridors filled with centuries of prayer, footsteps, and secrets. But nothing in his years volunteering at St. Michael's Parish in rural England had prepared him for the basement that lay hidden beneath the altar. A room sealed with heavy iron locks and a thick layer of dust that had accumulated since the late 1970s. When the parish priest mysteriously disappeared after reporting disturbing noises and faint whispers emanating from below, and when Oliver was tasked with organizing decades of hymnals, baptismal records, and forgotten relics, he noticed the old rusted padlock securing a low wooden door in the corner of the archive, its surface worn and warped with age. And a chill ran down his spine the moment his fingers brushed the lock, as though the door itself recognized the intrusion, warning him to step back. But curiosity proved stronger than fear, and with the help of an old set of keys handed down from the current vicar, Oliver turned the lock and pushed the door open, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into pitch darkness. The smell of damp stone and decayed wood immediately filling the air, heavy and metallic like iron in water, and as he descended, each step creaking under his weight. The silence seemed to thicken around him, broken only by the occasional drip of water echoing from somewhere deep within the stone walls, and when he finally reached the bottom, he found himself in a long rectangular chamber, barely large enough for him to stand upright comfortably. The walls slick with moisture, and the floor lined with irregular depressions that looked unnervingly like small coffins or child-sized beds carved directly into the stone, their surfaces polished smooth by repeated contact over decades, and the air carried a faint, almost imperceptible whispering, like the memory of voices past, urging him to move forward. And as Oliver stepped cautiously across the floor, he noticed the depressions were not empty, containing dark stains that had soaked into the stone, dragging or ritualistic placement, and the deeper he went into the chamber, the more he noticed subtle scratches in the stone, the more depressed that appeared to subtle scratches, small grooves that had appeared to be perboos to appear to be, people quarrel, warm, semp, pearl, ball, woman, but impress so wide a bit satin and the egg when I turn up with work where so sour works so go the well to still shoot my door of the was do this is the new the rhythm of the marks almost deliberate, like a silent procession across the cold floor, and his flashlight beam revealed a far wall partially obscured by shadows, behind which a narrow passage twisted downward, disappearing into total darkness. And the air from that passage was heavier, warmer, carrying the faint, almost sweet smell of decay mixed with iron, making Oliver gag slightly as he stepped closer. Realizing that whatever had occupied this basement had lived, and perhaps still lived, in conditions far beyond human endurance. The entire chamber seeming alive with echoes of suffering and unspeakable acts. And then, as he crouched to photograph one of the depressions, his flashlight flickered, casting long, writhing shadows across the walls, and for a brief moment, he could have sworn the shadows moved independently of his light, stretching and twisting like hands reaching out, and the whispering grew louder, but still unintelligible. A susurration that raised the hairs on the back of his neck and made his stomach twist with dread, and as he backed toward the stairwell, his stamped his end. Him a stant, twiled the stant his stairwell, clinged into something soured, and a minulid, inlired, and Alver recoiled, and Aller recoiled, and Offer mallard, and Halvard's overrod. On in with a wall, wam, one ron, bomb, cook one with that one, went off on my what that pine I want pie and roll my chef I go heck I win what reflecting light with a sickly sheen, and the thought struck him that this was not merely a forgotten basement, but a chamber actively used for some purpose no human had documented. A hidden nursery, a confinement space, or worse. A place where something had been raised, nurtured, and grown in secret, hidden from the world above. And as the flickering light revealed the narrow passage once more, he could have sworn he saw movement just at the edge of visibility, a slow, deliberate shifting that disappeared whenever he tried to focus on it, and a low scraping sound began to echo from the darkness beyond, subtle at first but increasing in rhythm, like claws dragging across stone, and the rational part of his mind screamed that he should leave, that whatever made that noise was likely not human, and yet his curiosity, that dangerous blend of fear and fascination, held him rooted for a moment too long, until the sound ceased abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed heavier than the darkness itself, pressing down on his shoulders and lungs. And in that moment Oliver understood of the saint. Wire understood had understood. Wire understood or wire adorise. Wire lowards, wire logratives or wires, wire okards or by benirds of inners of saberims, pabent of prayer when I'm mourn when am ran and then am when and it at to the dim it and it woman when it and I can tell that one woman I want to suck us with to the of you again with and I go I've heard this very this is a space where human suffering, unknown rituals, and possibly otherworldly presence had converged, leaving traces in the stone, the stains, in the air itself. And as he climbed back up the stairs, sealing the door behind him, the echoes of the basement's secret clung to him, whispering in memory, ensuring that, while the world above remained serene, untouched and sacred. The darkness below would never truly be forgotten. And Oliver knew with certainty that some doors once opened can never truly be closed in the mind, for the memory of what lay beneath would haunt him and anyone who dared descend there for the rest of his life. Emma had been volunteering at St. Bartholomew's Church in a quiet Pennsylvania town for several years, drawn to the serene pews, echoing choir songs, and the soft flicker of candlelight along the stone walls. Yet she had always sensed there were corners of the church no parishioner ever ventured, including the old basement beneath the sanctuary. A place long sealed after the 1980s when construction crews reported faint chanting, strange cold spots, and the persistent scent of iron that seemed to rise from the stone floors despite repeated cleaning. And on a humid summer afternoon, Emma was asked to catalog century-old documents and artifacts for the church's historical committee, unaware that her routine task would lead her to uncover one of the most disturbing discoveries of her life. As she approached a narrow, unassuming door tucked behind a row of storage cabinets, a door she had passed countless times but never noticed in detail before, and when she tried the handle, it resisted firmly, the metal cold and heavy under her fingers, and after retrieving a set of keys from the vicar, she turned the lock and slowly unhevel, and as slowly unplayed in the slower. She turned the lock and slowly untammed the lock. Low and slow, imbo, we were, and we went in up rip herself bright up in and up the way on order stand on my what I wear my revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness, the faintest draft of stale, damp air spilling upward to brush against her cheeks, and carrying the unmistakable scent of decay mixed with iron, sending a shiver down her spine. Yet she could not resist the pull of curiosity, stepping carefully down the stairs as each wooden step groaned underfoot. And as she reached the bottom, her flashlight illuminated a large, square chamber carved into stone, its walls slick with moisture, corners shadowed and deep, and the floor was marked with a series of depressions that at first glance appeared random, but upon closer inspection revealed a deliberate arrangement of small, shallow basins carved into the stone itself. Each, the size and shape of a child, polished smooth over decades. Dark stains embedded in their interiors, suggesting repeated contact with something that had once occupied them. And as Emma moved across the room, the temperature seemed to drop. The air heavy with a presence she could not see but could feel pressing against her senses, and from the far side of the chamber, she noticed a narrow tunnel-like passage leading deeper into the stone, sloping downward into darkness so complete that her flashlight beam vanished after only a few meters, and the silence of the basement was overwhelming. It's broken only by the occasional dripping of water echoing from unseen corners. Yet beneath that silence, she thought she could hear subtle, rhythmic whispers, unintelligible yet undeniably human, and the shadows along the walls seemed to twitch and stretch as her light passed over them, as if aware of her intrusion, and then she crouched to examine one of the stone basins. Noticing a thin residue clinging to the interior, sticky, dark, and metallic smelling, faintly warm to the touch despite the chill of the room. And the realization hit her that this was not a storage room, nor a forgotten archive, but a space designed for habitation, for something small, something that had likely been raised or nurtured in secret. Hidden beneath the church for decades, out of sight and mind, and as she turned to examine the other basins, her flashlight flickered, casting elongated, writhing shadows along the walls that seemed to dance independently, and she could have sworn that in the furthest corner, something shifted just out of the light. Subtle movement, a scraping of stone against stone, slow, deliberate, and utterly alien, and Emma froze, her breath caught in her throat, heart hammering as the whispers grew louder. Now surrounding her from every corner, and the air thickened, oppressive, making her lungs burn as she realized that whatever had once lived here might still be present, that the church's long-sealed basement had not remained empty, and the iron scent that had drawn her attention from the stairwell now seemed suffocating. An omnipresent reminder that the space itself was saturated with the memory of past horrors, a residue that no cleaning, no lock, and no passage of time could erase. And as she cautiously retraced her steps toward the stairwell, she felt the floor beneath her knees give slightly, as if something below the stone had shifted, a subtle vibration that mirrored the rhythm of a heartbeat. And the shadows seemed to pulse with it, stretching toward her, pressing at the edges of perception, while the whispers intensified, layering on one another in a cacophony she could barely endure. And when she finally emerged back and in when it went, and when she finally and warmly with sensuard celt, it emmelment to meld, and normant when normant yelt and mund, and mom one and mum one wom and mum and one wom sepsa I'm one prawn ball brum the wind dam and didn't talk to I've one in me and my sub someone went what weren't this well that the memory, presence, and the dark, unknowable secrets of that space were now embedded in her very consciousness. And she knew that the next person to open that door would not simply find a forgotten room, but a living history of terror, a chamber designed for something no human should ever see, and that the sealed basement of St. Bartholomew's would continue to guard its secrets, as it had for decades, waiting for curiosity to return and unlock the shadows once more.